And welcome on into a very late night edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, George Bremer here with you, recording right after the first round has concluded. The Colts did make a pick. Chris Ballard, to the shock, I'm sure, of many, did not trade back, instead stood strong at 15. We will get into a lot of the Colts now brand new defensive end, Laiatu Latu. George, did I get it?
I'm not sure yet. He's going to come in tomorrow. We didn't on Zoom. You don't want to waste your one question on how do you pronounce your name.
Fair.
But I think I've heard Laiatu and I've heard Laiatu. So we'll figure out, hopefully here on Friday, we'll get an official pronunciation. We can move forward with that.
Laiatu, that's what we'll go with right now, at least to keep it simple here on Thursday night. But either way, the Colts do get a defensive end from UCLA. First thing here, George, I want to ask you is, you see 14 offensive players in a row go off the board for the Colts. Your initial reaction to the Colts selecting the first, not only the first defensive player, but going Latu from UCLA, your reaction was what?
Yeah, first thing I was shocked that there were 14 offensive players. The record coming into today was 7. So they doubled the previous record for offensive players selected to start a draft. Just absolutely insane. And what, 6 of them were quarterbacks, which is tied the record for the first round period. And he did it in the first 12 picks. Uh, just an absolutely insane thing. I think 20 of the 32 picks today were either a quarterback, an offensive tackle, or wide receiver,
Wow.
which we were told
Shows
it
you where
was
the
going
league
to
is going.
be heavy. Yeah, oh, absolutely. We were told it was going to be really heavy. Honestly, my first reaction was I needed to do more work this offseason. I felt like I did not get as deep into the draft class as I have in the past. It was a busy spring for me, between college basketball and the fever and some of the other things that went on around here. I did work. I had a big board. It wasn't nearly as big as it's been in the past, but Latu wasn't on it because this, of course, was the year that I decided to cut the RAS off at 9.5 because the last couple of years he's been so high on that list that I said I'd gone to 9 every year before this, and I said, you know what, I'm going to cut it off at 9.5. Latu was 9.39, so he did not meet that criteria. But I think he's one of those guys that immediately, as soon as you look at the bio, it didn't take long at all. I think the thing that stood out to me right away is he was the Lott Trophy Award winner, which is uh, it's sort of like the Heisman, but it encompasses everything. Maturity, tenacity is one of I don't know how you measure tenacity, but it's one of their goals. Academics, so I would think anybody who wins that award is going to be a blue card for the Colts because it's all the things that they look for. And so you look at that, you look at the athleticism, you look at the production. Not hard to see why they made this pick. Wasn't somebody on my radar. But like I said, I think my takeaway from it was that's more a fault of mine than anything else. Should have been on my radar. Next year, I work harder to make sure I don't overlook a guy like that.
I had a wide range of emotions. Number one, this is my fault that I got suckered into thinking Brock Bowers is going to drop to 15. So I'm sitting
You almost
there
did.
as the Jets trade down. I'm like, oh my God, the Colts are going to trade up. No. Then they trade, and then they take a offensive tackle from Penn State. I said, okay, that was the team, right? We talked about it. That was the team that was going to take Brock Bowers. And then there's Bo Nix going. I'm like, oh my God, they are so close. It's like, look at the Saints, just like, please don't do it. And of course, the Raiders take it. So, number one, the range of emotions was pissed. A lot of expletives were flying in the control room as I'm trying to produce our draft show because the Raiders ripped my heart out, number one. But then it's just like, okay, like you see the two positions, or you see then the Colts have the pick of the litter at defense. I thought it was going to be Dallas Turner, right?
I
We
did too.
talk about athleticism. He tore up the combine. Obviously, going to Alabama, he's proven it. Playing alongside Will Anderson, but also then the next year, this past year, 2023, playing on his own and kind of still being that premier edge force. I thought he checked a lot of boxes Chris Ballard does look for. And so even though corner was a bigger need, I personally wanted to go edge and really want to get Dallas Turner on the team. I thought that was a better fit. And so obviously was shocked, I think, like many, that it was Latu being not only the first defensive player off the board, the guy the Colts were going to take. And we'll get into one of the reasons why here in a little bit that Chris Ballard and even Latu himself unveiled, which was very interesting in terms of communication or really lack thereof this offseason. And so I'll be honest, like initially, I'm like, what are we doing here? Like the most I have heard about Latu is the fact that the guy's a neck injury, and I was like, he had to medically retire. So I'm like, this guy's one hit away from being out. The comp I've seen a lot on social media that scares me a little bit, I'll be honest, is Jalen Phillips, who similar had to medically retire and was careers on the fringe, comes back on Miami, really resurrects his career. Now I know he's been injured and it's not been the same injury, which is good. But he's been really good when he's been out there. But then you see like what everyone is saying, then you watch highlights and clips, like it is a risk. But I will say, digging into it more in the last few hours, George, I feel a lot better about the pick than I did, let's say at, I don't know, 9:30, whenever like the pick was officially made. I do feel a lot better about it now.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that I think really comes down to the neck injury too is you got to remember that was COVID times. And one of the things that I thought that Latu kind of explained, because obviously that was one of the first questions that came up. He never had a physical examination during that whole time. It was all, uh, you know, people looking from afar at his papers and at his case. And so he never really felt like it should have happened.
Wait, sorry, I
And
mean cut you off, but like that's how he was medically, or was it suggested, right? At
yep,
Washington,
the
they
doctors did not clear him.
suggested he medically retire. Not they never saw him in person.
Never saw him in person. That's what he said. I mean, we've got to go with his
That's
word,
wild.
at this point. And he said there was no physical examination. Nobody laid hands on him. It was just, a doctor from afar
Makes me feel
coming out
better.
and saying, okay, with all the situation and the information we have on hand, this we're going to do. He was playing rugby while he was medically retired. So I yes, it's concerning. It's a neck injury. You're absolutely going to be concerned about that. He had a similar surgery to Peyton Manning. So it's a major situation. But Manning, of course, came back and played at a high level after that surgery. And we've seen him for 2 years at UCLA go out there. And that's what Chris Ballard said during his availabilities, that he went out there and had 23 and a half sacks in 2 seasons at UCLA and no issues. So right now, their doctors don't have a problem with it. But I really do think it's important to remember this was a COVID times. Everything was a little bit weird then. It was not a physical examination, at least from his. Now, look, maybe someone will come out and refute this, even by the time you're watching this pod. But from what he told us today, the information I have to go on right now, there was no physical examination. This was a doctor remotely making this decision.
And the doctor who cleared him and I guess allowed him to unmedically retire was the same specialist who, like you said, saw Peyton Manning and performed hip surgery. And obviously, the neck surgery worked out well for Peyton. We saw him go to 2 Super Bowls and one with Denver. So obviously, that worked out well. And so at least you feel good right now that, okay, the same guy who had that opinion and cleared Peyton is the same guy who's now clearing Latu, that at least hopefully, won't spring any issues now in the next, forget about just this upcoming year, the next 5 and hopefully 10 years from now, that everything's all good going forward. But what excites me, George, is the fact that it's funny. So Chris Ballard, for those Office fans out there, Chris Ballard reminds you a lot of Dwight Schrute. Here's what I mean by that. There's one episode where they're like everyone in the office is like a board game. It's like you solve the murder game. And Dwight on camera is like, he picks out one of the characters, Phyllis. She goes, she's guilty. We want to know why. He goes, he's never the person you most suspect. It's also never the person you least suspect. It's always the person you middle or somewhat suspect. That's what I feel like what Chris Ballard does in the draft, right? We talked about it going into this draft. We talked about it the last few weeks. Corner is obviously a big need, but almost feels like corner feels sometimes too obvious of like, that's clearly the most glaring need. Well, he's not going to draft that. The most surprising need, for example, quarterback, like what the Falcons did in signing Kirk Cousins, then drafting Michael Penix Jr., a total, what is going on here? He's also never going to do that as well. But it's always somewhere in the middle. And we talked about edge. We didn't talk about it a lot, but we talked about it as a position possibly that they could, dive into more pertaining around Dallas Turner. But still, like that was a position that, yeah, they do need some help. They've talked about whether it's, changing coaches, D-line coaches, going hard after Danielle Hunter and not getting him, but like they have made efforts to improve that position. And it seems like George, from what you read, what you hear, and the production, just flat out the numbers from UCLA, they got a playmaker. They got someone who is an explosive playmaker that Chris Ballard talked a lot about at the end of the year press conference. They got it at a position that is one of the most impactful in the game. And in this division with Stroud, with Lawrence, with the Titans, you need someone to get after the quarterback. And all Latu has done since medically unretiring is get after the quarterback and live in the backfield.
Yeah, the comp I've seen the most already is TJ Watt. And if they just drafted TJ Watt, then you're going to feel pretty good about that.
Holy
The
cow.
little bit of film that I've watched, not even film, the clips that I've seen, uh, from a bending standpoint, I see a little bit of Robert Mathis. You've got that same kind of relentless motor. You've got that same kind of, effort. So if you're somewhere between those two, it's going to be a really ridiculously good pick. But you don't know. Ballard himself said today, you got to go out and play. So you can justify it for all the reasons that you made the pick, but eventually he's got to go out and perform, and we'll see what happens. I do think one of the things that we've talked a lot about on the pod, and I think one of the most fair criticisms of Chris Ballard over his time here has been that he hasn't put enough emphasis on premium positions, that the best players on the team are playing, positions that are not necessarily the most impactful positions on the field. Well, that's not the case with Latu. This is one of the top 3 positions, probably importance level in the NFL right now. So can't use that argument today. I do think there were a couple really interesting things that came out of Ballard's presser. And I don't know how many people stayed up late enough to watch it because it was obviously later after the first round. And people do have jobs and lives. And so probably some of them were asleep. I would have chosen to be if I had that option, but wasn't on the board for me. 2 things I think that were really important that he said. One is they did try to trade up. Didn't talk about who. Hinted strongly it was an offensive player. We can take guesses, on who it was. But he said they made big offers and nobody was moving. And I think that's evident from just, I think you needed him to tell you that. When you look out there, 6 of the picks were quarterbacks. None of those guys were moving. And really, when we were talking, on the pod, the regular pod this week, you can go back and check that. It was a day earlier this week. It was Tuesday, instead of our normal Wednesday. We said, look, 8-9 is kind of that area where if you're going to look for them to trade up, that's kind of that spot. And if they were going after Bowers or a Dunze, that's where it was probably going to happen. Well, the Falcons, as you mentioned, made the pick that changed the first round when they got Michael Penix Jr. and just blew everybody's mind, including Kirk Cousins. We'll see how that plays out. And then at 9, the Bears weren't going to move off of Dunze because they knew that's who the Colts were potentially coming up to take. They weren't going to make that deal. And then, yes, the Jets traded back 1 spot from 10 to 11, knowing that the Vikings were going to take a quarterback. So those 2 spots were off the board. So, okay, 12 with the Broncos, they took a quarterback. They weren't moving. And then the Raiders took Bowers at 13. So he did try to move up. I think that was an important thing he talked about. I believe it. Look at it. People weren't
Right.
moving, The other thing he said is they had 4 or 5 elite guys in this draft on their grades. And I think I said all offseason long, the unknowable thing every draft with Chris Ballard is what his evaluation is. We can look at our side of things. We can look at what the consensus is. We do not know, unless we're in that room, what Chris Ballard's saying. And what he said today is Latu was one of those 4 or 5 guys. So we talked a lot about, hey, they could take an impact defensive end. We thought it was Dallas Turner. They thought it was Latu, and that's the way it went. From that standpoint, the premium nature of the position, the fact that he was one of 4 or 5 elite guys, and the fact they tried to trade up and it didn't happen, I think that, for me, that cleared up any questions I had.
And clearly, too, by the way, with him being the first defensive player off the board, we know that he was number 1 on the Colts board because you have the pick of the litter. Quinyon Mitchell, Dallas Turner, Latu, they felt most comfortable with Latu. So that's also, there's no lying there. Clearly where his board laid in terms of defensive players. And like you said, maybe he had Brock Bowers or Rome Odunze, ahead of them. But like we talked about it on Tuesday, it takes 2 to tango, right? And that was the unknown as well of if the Colts, we thought they'd have to trade up to get Brock Bowers. We proved to be correct on that. He's not going to fall to 15. The problem is, and I'm with you, and I do agree with you that I do believe Chris Ballard that he tried, but it is evident that like how the board played out, no one was trading back to 15 because like all the premier offensive players were going. That's what everyone wanted. No one's going to sit back and basically take the fifth receiver or the defensive player if they wanted a receiver like the Bears did, a tight end like the Raiders did, a tackle like the Jets did. Like it's all right there in front of you. Now, what's exciting too, and I like because obviously corner's still in need, right? And we'll get into round two here, kind of names to look at it and positions to look at as well here in a little bit. But like how you help your young corners is by speeding up the quarterback. And what I like the most about Latu, George, is that this is, from everything you read, a plug and play guy. Like this is not a developmental player. This is not, oh, we're going to wean him along slowly. He is a polished, ready to go edge rusher who has a lot of experience, who can plug and play week one, and by all intents and purposes should be I won't say a game record, but should be an impact player early on. It's going to help you pass rush. And it's also, I mean, look, I hope it lights a fire under Kwity Paye's ass.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a big year. The Colts have a big decision to make next month, or really actually next week, about whether they have to pick up Kwity Paye's fifth-year option or not. And that's a position, edge specifically, that it never hurts to have too much depth. And now I think that those two boxes right there, impact player and depth, are a big reason why over corner, like when it comes to should the Colts have gone corner or edge, I like the edge pick, George.
I've been saying all year too, Ballard likes the corners better than we do. Whether that's the media, whether it's the fan
You're
base.
talking about on the roster.
Yeah, they're on the roster that he does. Right or wrong, he's made that clear. And I think he made it clear again today. As you mentioned, this isn't the first time they dipped into the defensive end pool. They made a better offer to Danielle Hunter, at least reportedly, than Houston did. And he wanted to go to Houston. And Ballard pretty much confirmed that they had gone after Hunter at the end of that press conference today when he said they were going after a 29-year-old defensive end, which would be Danielle Hunter. So, that I think part of that too, that you don't think about a lot. I always talk about he leaves some breadcrumbs. We don't know them until the pick are made. He was talking about the push-pull before the draft between the coaches and the scouts of something that impacts the roster right now, or something that, you're looking at, hey, this guy's up in 2 years and we need to replace him. Well, you look at that defensive end group right now, it's crowded. There's 5 guys up there at the top. 2 of them, though, Kwity Paye, as you mentioned, has a 5th-year option that they've got to make a decision on next week. And if you don't pick that up, very seldom does that guy come back. We've seen it. If they do, I think the Raiders ended up franchise tagging Josh Jacobs, and then he left anyway. But Dio Dangbo is now in the last year of his rookie deal because he was a second-round pick in that same draft.
Mm-hmm.
So those 2 guys are both you're not 100% comfortable that they're going to be on the roster in 2025. So now you've got Latu. If he works out, gives you more flexibility there. Ballard himself mentioned that 2 more guys in that group, Tyquan Lewis and Odangbo, so I guess technically he's overlapping here, they have interior versatility too. So you can move them around a little bit. You can get some of these guys on the field at the same time. I think one of the things about Latu that really stands out, a couple things that I think are important to mention. One, he's different because of something that you just said. He's different than the other picks they've had at defensive end because during Ballard's run, it's always been physical traits. They've been looking at upside. They've been looking at potential, what they can be. Latu has the production. He's athletic. Like I say, he's got a 9.39 RAS, so it's not like he's not an athlete. But that's not why he's on this roster. It's the production. It's what he's done on the field. He's more polished. Ballard used that word exactly that you used. That's different profile than what they've gone for at that spot. But I also think if you were looking at what that defensive line was missing last year, they did a great job. They had 51 sacks. We've talked about that a million times. One, they didn't have that edge rusher that opposing offenses were staying up late at night the week preparing for this. They're hoping Latu will be that guy. But I think more specifically, they didn't have a natural Leo in that defensive position, that guy that goes out wide. And really, if they're going to use it the way Seattle did, that guy stands up sometimes, drops into coverage. You think about what Bruce Irvin did. Latu can be that guy. I'm not saying he will, but he can. He can do that. You've already seen it on tape. They didn't have that on the roster. He's different than any of the other guys there on the defensive end. Kwity Paye, Dio Dangbo, Samson Ebukam, for as productive as they've been, as good as they've been, they're all more that opposite defensive end guy. They're not really true Leos. So I think those are important things to kind of, differentiate here. He's different from because he's polished and there's a lot of college production on the resume. He's different than the other picks, but he's different than the guys on the roster because I think he is more in that true Leo mold. And it gives Gus Bradley a lot of things he can do now to move around. You can stand Latu up at times if you want to get another rusher on the field. You can move Odangbo and Lewis inside and get more guys on the field. And plus, I mean, that position is a spot where you're going to miss a game or two. Those guys go through hell throughout the season. So having some depth there's never a bad idea.
And what I like too is the versatility he brings, that he's basically played every position on the defensive line at UCLA, and he's produced.
He played three for the three technique for a while.
So it's like, it's one of those, like, too, to your point, like, not only is he like refined and ready to go and can be, hopefully for the Colts, that feared edge rusher that they've really missed for a long time. They've had spurts here and there. Justin Houston came in one, like, they've not had a consistent edge force in a very long time. Hopefully, or at least from what we see in UCLA, Latu has the potential to fill that, number one. But also number two, what I like a lot is the versatility of, like, it's a lot harder to defend a guy of Latu's skill when you don't know where he's lining up. It's one thing if you're the Texans, you have Laremy Tunsil left tackle, and it goes, okay, like, it's just going to be mano a mano all game long. You can scheme for that, right? You can put the running back there. You can put a tight end there. You can chip. But when you are now able to move around and even slide inside, if you want to get super nuts, on some maybe third down pass rush schemes and just throw a curveball, like, it just makes the job of an offensive coordinator and an offensive line coach for that week so much more difficult, and provides, like you said, more options for Gus Bradley to be more creative of where you want to put him, make offenses think, and just give you an advantage. And we saw, like, in this past year, the Colts did not have a lot of advantages on the defensive, or on the edge, I should say. Interior, they did. On the outside, they did not. Now, all of a sudden, DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart, and now hopefully Latu on the edge, let's say, as three premier guys that defenses have to worry about every single week. It's going to make Kwity Paye better. It's going to make Samson Ebukam better. It's going to make Dio Dangbo better. And it's going to make this Colts defense better. It's going to make the young secondary better. This hits the way it projects, George. This is going to be a fun defense and a really tough defense to try to slow down here in a few years.
Yeah, one of the criticisms I've seen a lot, because social media is definitely real life. So
yes,
you definitely take that to the bank. One of the criticisms I've seen a lot in the early going was, how does this help Anthony Richardson? That's how it helps Anthony Richardson. You get the lead, and you can turn a guy like Latu free to go after the quarterback. They haven't really had that since Mathis and Freeney were here, where you had that player that, if you fall behind, you better look out, because somebody's coming off that edge and coming at you and going to take your head off. To your point about, the production on the edge, since Mathis and Freeney left the franchise, Justin Houston's the only player on the edge to have a double-digit sack season. So, how necessary is this pick? I would say pretty necessary based on that. You look at guys like Yannick Ngakoue, who had a decent year when he was here. Ebukam had a decent year last year. You're not talking about 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 sacks. That's what you're expecting from Latu. Will it happen right away? Who knows? That's tough to do in your rookie year. But he's a guy who has that polish. He's got Ballard talked during the combine about, one of the things about this draft class in the last couple is that COVID year has given you a little more experience. He's 23. That can be a red flag. It can go both ways. I mean, two things that I think I've seen come up the most as far as concerns are obviously the neck. We went through that right at the top because that's the most important element here. And the other one is age, that he's 23. Is that going to be a problem down the line? Ballard said, no, for him, that's not even an issue. But Ballard also talked at the draft about some of these guys are coming in a lot more ready to play because they have so many reps behind them. He's one of those guys. And I think that maybe he has a little bit bigger rookie year because of it. Look, he's going to have to compete. He's not going to be handed anything. I
Right.
mentioned he's the most true Leo out there. That doesn't mean he just gets the job day one. He's going to have to come in here. He's going to have to beat out some veteran guys who played pretty well last year. That's good. That's what you should want.
We talk about competition, and we've criticized Chris Ballard on the offensive line, right, for not bringing competition, for handing guys jobs. It failed miserably in 2022, worked out a lot better in 2023, but now at a position that, again, that has been inconsistent, you're bringing competition. And if Latu does make the impact, we hope he makes it in year number one, but it helps Quiddy Pay, get better. Like it's a win. And to your initial point, and because you're right, that's anyone who's upset about the pick. Number one is pissed that it's a defensive player and not an offensive player to help Anthony Richardson. Colts are 28th in points allowed last year. Okay, if you help that pass rush become more consistent, and they could go from 28th to 20th next year, you're helping Anthony Richardson out because you are just, again, taking pressure off his shoulders because he doesn't have to feel like every time he goes on the field, I have to score because I know my defense can't, stop anybody. That's how you help your quarterback, by providing a defense and making it where you score 20 points, maybe some games, you feel pretty good about winning. For the Colts this past year, they scored 20 points. They lost most of those games. So that's how you make Anthony Richardson's life a lot easier, George. Um, I guess final thing here to wrap up, at least the first round reaction. Um, were you surprised when the Colts had the pick of the litter defensively that they did not go Quinyon Mitchell? I guess how shocked were you?
I wasn't shocked it wasn't Mitchell. I was shocked it wasn't Turner because I was in the same situation that you were. As they got down to that point, once Bowers went to the Raiders, my mindset was it's Dallas Turner. And I'm not going to name names, but there was somebody in the media room writing a Dallas Turner story. It wasn't me, because I'm too lazy to work that far ahead. But there was somebody in the media room writing a Dallas Turner story. That's how much the feeling was confidence is going to be Dallas Turner. But like I said, I think a lot of that's just once you look into it, Latu hits a lot of the boxes. He was at Senior Bowl. He's
Yes, he
overcome
was.
adversity already at somewhere else in his career. What I think is interesting, because I think there was a lot of talk about this, and I think we should mention it before we move on. They didn't talk to him a lot during the process, and that made a really big impact early on. He mentioned it in his thing, and Ballard said we didn't need to. He said we had a really good relationship with Chip Kelly, so we got everything we needed from him as far as practice habits, work ethic, all that kind of stuff. They had the background already. I mentioned he won the lot award, which tells you a lot as far as what they want to do. I would imagine that guy automatically gets a blue card on the Colts board, whoever it is, every year. But they felt like they had enough info from Chip Kelly, and then the tape spoke for itself. So they didn't talk to him because they didn't feel like they needed to. They had all the info they needed. He said this was a guy. Some of them are really easy. Some of you got to dig really deep into. Some are really easy. This was a really easy one. And so that's why there wasn't a lot of contact between them. They just felt like, hey, we know who he is. We have the picture we need. We don't have to question him a lot. Tape speaks for itself. We've talked to his coach. We have a good relationship with his coach. We've got the info we need, and we can move on.
I guess my only thing with that is, like, in not talking to him, I
Mhm.
don't, you, everything you said is valid, right? And they have obviously clear all the resources. But I guess if I was Chris Ballard, I would still want to make, like, I don't see, I guess, the downside of talking to him, right? Even if you have all the information onto do you think that's just like to do what Chris Ballard loves to do, stay under the radar and not like leave any sort of like footprint or trail of, hey, they're sniffing around this guy. So maybe, a team jumps him. Like, is that the only reason? That's the only reason I can think of. Is there another reason why you could think of a justification of not talking to him?
That part doesn't hurt. That it helps you stay kind of stealth under the radar there, and it keeps other people, off your trail. But you also got to remember, like the area scouts talk to him a lot. So when he says the team wasn't talking to him, the front office wasn't. It wasn't in a formal situation. They didn't bring him in. They talked to him informally at the combine, but they didn't bring him in for a 30, top 30 visit. They didn't bring him in for a formal visit at the combine. They didn't have a formal sit down at the Senior Bowl. Everybody talks to everybody at the Senior Bowl, though. So it was other levels of it. They didn't feel like they had to bring Chris Ballard in. felt like the area scouts out there had it covered. They got the job done, and they talked to him plenty. And I think part of the reason you do that is you have what 150 odd guys. I forget how many he said he's got on the board this year. It's usually between 150, 200, somewhere in that neighborhood of guys that they have as their draftable list. Um, you can't spend equal amount of times on every one of them. So I think with each of those guys, you kind of feel like, okay, once you've got to a point where you feel comfortable that you've got it done, you move on. If that happens early in the process, great. Now you can go down to this other guy who maybe you will find out about later this weekend.
Yeah, that was, I'm glad you brought that up because I almost did forget. It's late, so my brain has just
Mm,
stopped working. But yeah, that was definitely an eye raiser because,
mhm.
like you said, you would assume that. I mean, especially with how much conviction Chris Ballard talked about making the pick, that you would assume that they've talked to him, they know him very well, and yeah, quite the opposite, quite the opposite.
That
Um,
also, though, is one reason I hate the "have you met with" question, because we haven't seen that a lot with this team under Chris Ballard. Usually, it's somebody they have talked to quite a bit. This is one of the first ones I can remember. But like Reggie Wayne talks all the time about. Colts never talked to him before they made that pick. He had no idea was coming to Indianapolis, and you hear at least one or two guys every year somewhere across the league who say that. That's why it's just my own little pet peeve. I hate that question in the combine. It wastes time. And that's part of why it doesn't tell you anything. You don't, if they haven't met with someone, doesn't mean they're not going to take them. Latu right now is exhibit A.
You're right about that. I would agree. I do hate that discussion just because I don't think, like you said, it doesn't really accomplish anything. And plenty of teams meet with plenty of players that they know they have no chance of drafting anyway, but they still do it. Yeah, so I would agree in that sense. I mean, definitely very interesting. All right, as we look ahead now to rounds 2 and 3. As a reminder, by the way, we are recording this live after the first round. We will be back on Sunday to give you a full 7 round recap, as well. So make sure whether it's Blue Horseshoe Pod on YouTube, whether it's wherever you do get your podcast, say name Blue Horseshoe Pod. Make sure you subscribe. We got a lot of draft content coming your way. Colts on Friday night seemingly could be busy. 2 picks, one in the second, one in the third. Pick 46 is the one that they're up next, George. So obviously, corner is still out there. We've seen, three corners go off the top of my head, if I got that right in the first round.
I think so.
Right, Terran Arnold,
Quinion
Quinion
Mitchell,
Mitchell,
Nate
and
Wiggins went late.
yes, Nate Wiggins to go as well. So you have some corners there you could draft. Pass catcher, I would say, still a big need as well.
Mhm.
Assuming nothing wonky happens with the trade up here, George, where do you see kind of position wise at least Colts and Chris Ballard kind of looking at here in round 2?
Well, yeah, I think wide receiver is going to be high on the list. It's something that I think they were interested in here. When they're trading up. You got to figure it was either for a receiver or tight end. Most likely. They didn't say that, but it wasn't quarterback. We know that. So it probably was either wide receiver or tight end. Maybe it was an offensive tackle. So maybe that could fit into there. A lot of that depends on how concerned they are with Braden Smith's health and long term. Where they feel like that. Because this first pick really was. I think I want to be clear. I think Latu is going to make a big impact year one, but it also is something that kind of helps you down the line because some of these decisions are going to have to be made at defensive end. Well, offense tackle could be, a position like that where you want to get ahead of it a little bit. They got a lot of depth there though, so I don't know that it would necessarily be high on the list. But it's for me, offensive tackle tomorrow is what defensive end was today. It's not the big need. It's not a shocker. It's somewhere in that sweet spot in the middle. But I definitely think corner is going to stay on there. Safety is going to stay on there. I think I had on my mock draft, which is already wrong, by the way, because Xavier Leggett was my second round pick. So it's already out the window. But I think I had a receiver and a safety going in rounds 2 and 3. But we're almost to the point, too, now where outside of quarterback, would anything really shock you tomorrow? Like, what position outside of quarterback, if they drafted, would you fall out of your chair?
Off the top of my head, would say running back,
Mhm. That's a good one.
but like you also, I mean, I think there are fair questions. You look at the depth behind Jonathan Taylor now with Zach Moss gone. Like there's a lot of young guys, a lot of unproven guys. You're making a young room behind JT, possibly younger. I would be shocked about running back, and just because they drafted one, I'd be shocked about defensive end, just because
Yeah.
I don't think they'll double up rounds 1 and 2 in an already crowded defensive end room. But honestly, I guess outside of those three positions, quarterback, running back, defensive end, I would agree with you that almost anything else on the table.
I think one stealth spot, I don't know if they'll go this high, but I feel like there might be a linebacker in this class. They've done a really good job picking there. And,
They have.
you've got EJ Speed and you've got Zaire Franklin. You're really good there, but depth at that spot, there might be that might be a position that they could look into. Specifically, I don't know where it'll go, but Peyton Wilson from North Carolina State is a guy that hits a lot of their boxes. Now, is that something they're going to spend a second round pick on? I think it's a similar situation to Latu. It really depends on what comes ahead of them. And the names that immediately jump out at me, that are out there now that you would think the Colts might have interest in. Donnie Mitchell, who has a 9.99 RAS, who I think there were reasons a lot of teams weren't necessarily all in on him in the first round, but day two, he's going to be a much more coveted guy. And for whatever reason, Colts spent a lot of time around Texas this spring. So we'll see if that amounts to anything. Oregon wide receiver Tony Franklin, I think, is going to be a real possibility here. Another guy that fits a lot of their physical, uh, check list. Late. I'm trying to come up with words here, and they're not forming.
He was an explosive playmaker at the Ducks. Him
Yeah,
and Bo Nix had a tremendous connection.
like I could see that. I could see that being a guy that they want to go for in round two. The other one I've just heard, I've had people tell me that they have some interest in Lad McConkey. So they may go get a Georgia pass catcher, but not the one everybody thought ahead of time. You would think Cooper DeJean would be a possibility. I think he's probably going to go a lot earlier than 46. But hey, we just saw today what we think may not be what actually occurs on game day, but his versatility out there in the defensive backfield, another guy that was talked about as a first rounder. Those are the names that pop off. But I think also look at those as positions. So wide receiver, safety corner. I think that's sort of the direction I would think they go. And maybe, I don't know, there's a tight end out there because we talked about how steep the drop was after Bowers. But if they've got one that they have rated that highly, we've talked about Shane Steichen and what he's mentioned. I have him taking Cade Stover in the 4th round from Ohio State. So we'll see if
Okay.
that's the way it goes. Because obviously, I mean, I'm already 0 for 2 on my picks. So you should definitely take these to the bank. Because I had Quinion Mitchell in round 1 and I had Xavier Legette in round 2. And we know that's not going to happen. But I think tight end's another one that I would put. I just don't know that guy is there in round 2. But if he is, I don't think you can rule that out at all.
I think in round 2, Cooper DeJean would be like the home run pick.
Mhm.
I agree with you, though. I think he's going very quickly in round number 2. So unless Chris Ballard is super aggressive, which, I mean, like we saw today, that might not even be enough
Right.
to, I mean, the Bills are having the first pick of the second round, and they lost everyone in their secondary
Mhm.
this offseason. So it makes a lot of sense if you're Buffalo to grab Mr. Do It All kind of in the secondary, if you will, from Iowa. So I don't expect him to go last very long in round number 2. So I don't think that's realistic. The thing, so one name that I'm gonna throw one name by that I like, and a question by a name you just threw out there. The name I like that I keep coming back to, what the athleticism is questionable. Keon Coleman is a player that I like a lot. He's a playmaker. I think his body type and what he does fits in this offense because he's not exactly like Michael Pittman Jr. Like I think he's more of a deep threat and more of a
Mhm.
bigger playmaker down the field than Pittman is. I guess he, if you will, could replace Alec Pierce, but it's not like a copy of what Michael Pittman Jr. can do. So I like the differentiating skill sets along with Josh Downs on the offense. That's a receiver I like a lot. I mean, maybe the athleticism scores don't reflect maybe exactly what Chris Ballard would want, but from what I saw at Florida State, I liked what I saw a lot. But one name that is, I guess, confusing that if they drafted him, I don't know if I'd be on board with George is Lad McConkey.
Mhm.
Not from anything as well. I do have questions about his injury history. He has gotten banged up a lot with the Bulldogs.
That's-
And, to his credit, he was very tough and played a lot, but still was limited with injuries that slowed him down. But like, isn't that basically Josh Downs 2.0? Like, I guess that's my question
Yep.
is just like if you got Downs last year, I just don't see the unless you think Downs after 1 year is not it. I don't see like the
They're all
Lad
in on
McConkey
Downs.
pick.
They're all in on Downs. I don't. That one caught me by surprise. When I was told that, I was like, really? But I was told they like him as a possession receiver. So take that for what it's worth. Also understand, a lot of these things that happen, they like a lot of guys. It doesn't matter. They're only going to take 7 of them. There's probably,
That's true.
100 guys out there that they like. So when you hear these things, that's why a lot of that stuff doesn't make it into print for me because it's not what's the percentage? There are guys today that they liked that went before them, and I'm sure there's guys that they liked that went after them, but the only guy they ended up with was Latu. So, at the end of the day, that's what really matters. I don't know. I agree with you. I mean, when I heard that, I thought that's kind of interesting, but I thought I'll throw it out there because one of the few things I've heard this spring. So I also heard they liked Ricky Pearsall, but that ain't going to happen. He's already
Former
off the board.
teammate could have reunited the Gators together.
That's what I heard was that they had interest in the second round in making that happen. We'll never know if that was true or not now. But I like the Coleman comp because if you go way back before the combine, there were a lot of people talking about Coleman's possibility at 15. Like he's a guy that kind of fits this offense that could come in. And then I feel like guys like Xavier Worthy kind of passed him up during the process when they went out and they tested well. Um, Coleman could be a guy. I don't know. We won't know until after the picks are made, but he could be a guy that Reggie Wayne really likes. And I think that's what got Josh Downs here. Downs had the athleticism, but his size, we had not seen Chris Ballard go there. So I don't think he was on a lot of people's radar. And Reggie Wayne kind of stood up on the table for him and said, no, this is the guy I want. So if Coleman's one of those guys with Reggie Wayne, I think it could definitely happen. And also just plain value. I mean, we know Ballard likes this receiver class. He said multiple times he feels like it's a really, really deep wide receiver class. So could Coleman be one of those guys that's there at 46? Absolutely. Could they be choosing, look, I think Adonai Mitchell, so we get a Mitchell, just not the one we were talking about. Tony Franklin, Keon Coleman. I feel like those are 3 guys that you could really keep an eye on, as they go through that. And I'm sure there's more. For me personally, like if I'm gonna throw a name out there I haven't heard that I just like the fit, I like the personality, I like the background, is Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son. So get a Hall of Famer's son, just not the one everybody wanted coming in.
You're right. You're right. That would be funny. That'd be, I'm sure Jim Irsay would market that a ton. He would not be shy about marketing that. That is for sure.
He's
Uh,
another guy. I mean, I think part of that is we know lately they've really liked the West Coast. Chris McGaha has done a really good job scouting out there for him. They like those West Coast guys. I don't think it's much of a coincidence that Latu's coming, from that area. And so they've had good luck with USC receivers here before. Not completely out of the question. I haven't heard anything on that. That's not the only name I heard was Lab McConkey and Ricky Pearsall. And we'll see where that goes. I have no idea because I'm with you on McConkey. I don't really understand that one. But if they draft him, I'm sure they'll tell us why. And then we'll see. Brendan Rice for me is just one I think character wise he fits what the Colts want, and it'd be an interesting pick.
Last thing here before I wrap this up, George, just because we won't get a chance to talk again before at least the third round's over, before the rest of the draft's over, most likely, barring something crazy. Which this is, I'm about to throw out something crazy. Why not? Let's get nuts here. So we talked about before Brandon Ayuk trade we didn't see happening for the Colts. Now, by all reports you read on Thursday, the 49ers were possibly shopping Ayuk, also maybe shopping Deebo Samuel in order to move up in the draft.
Mhm.
No one was calling back. No one was taking the bait. They draft Ricky Pearsall at 31, which now I think lends questions to, okay, maybe the 49ers are, they drafted a receiver because they expect at least one of those 2 guys to not be there maybe this year. Well, the first round pick hope they're trying to get for either Ayuk or Deebo obviously did not come to fruition because no one traded for him. Maybe they lower their price. Do you, instead of drafting at 46, a receiver, is there any chance in your mind, George, you could see Chris Ballard trading for either Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel.
I don't see it because of the money. I just don't see him paying two receivers. Very, very few teams do it. I think the Eagles might be the only one doing it right now across the entire league.
Double down on that.
Yes, they did, in a major, major way. And I think honestly, that deal that AJ Brown just signed makes it even less likely that they'll do it because the price of a receiver just went up. All of a sudden, Michael Pittman looks like a steal. I mean, I knew most of these deals as they play out, you start to go, okay, that was a pretty good deal. After that AJ Brown deal, Pittman looks like a bargain. And I don't think you're going to get that with Samuel or Ayuk. So that's why I think that AJ Brown deal, I already thought it wasn't very likely, as we've mentioned before. I think that AJ Brown deal, in my mind, makes it even more likely that they want that player to come through the draft.
Let me just see really fast here because obviously Deebo's under contract, but that was a few years ago. His contract expires because at least if you trade for him, you don't have to. You would think you don't have to worry about. Oh, he's got as an unrestricted free agent after 2025. So you got only 2 years left under contract with them. Yeah, okay. Hey, we're just trying to get nuts. Yeah, it
No,
is
and
big
it
money.
and
Amon-Ra
look,
St. Brown also didn't help in terms of driving the price up as well. So it's
not
expensive.
help. It does not help at all. But look, I didn't see Latu coming either. So like, it's not out of the question. I know there's a lot of smoke around there, and to your point, the other name that was mentioned a lot as far as like a trade partner with San Francisco was Jacksonville. They took a receiver too, so maybe they're out of that market as well. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where this all rolls around. But I just based on what Ballard's done before. Now he did change up today, and I really think that's an important point because I think a lot of people are saying it's business as usual. It was not. This was a different kind of draft pick than we've seen him make. And they did try to trade up. It just didn't happen. So maybe part of that's going to be they've got the caps room. Maybe he is going to go and get an impact receiver like this. Maybe a player will be involved in that deal. I don't know. But I don't expect it. That's all I can say. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen because I said I'm 0 for 2 already, and the draft does only have one pick. So, I'm not going to sit here and act like I can foresee everything that's coming. But I just think that receiver market's getting so expensive that it's probably in Chris Ballard's mind more preferable if the right guy's there at 46. Now, the question is, if he's not, do they still have any kind of strength and faith in round 3? At some point, maybe it does come more into play.
Definitely, I would say round 2 is gonna be fun because, like you said, the Latu pick I think sets the tone for the Colts the rest of the draft of way unpredictability, and they're not gonna get backed into a corner where they're not afraid to take best player available. They're not afraid to double up at a position or increase the depth, or just because they have a glaring need, they're not gonna force it. So we are sitting here talking about corner and receiver. Watch, here comes an offensive tackle, round 2. Get ready for it.
That would not surprise me at all. I still say that's the defensive end of round 2.
I was gonna say Austin Powers. I really should know this, but it's late.
That'd be a
The
very interesting
center from Oregon. Come on down, Jackson Powers Johnson.
I mean, it's center depth chart. We'll see. They did bring back Danny Penner, and obviously Wesley French played really well there. But we've seen, and that's to your point, the Latu pick puts a lot more stuff in play because look, if you're going to add competition to that defensive end room because you felt like that was the highest rated guy, then Danny Penner and Wesley French aren't going to keep you from taking a center if that's your highest rated player on the board.
You're right. It's going to be very, very, very interesting and definitely very fun. I think one thing we can definitely confirm, by the way, not only did I get a big swing and miss on the Colts trading up to get Brock Bowers, a big swing and miss on the Colts trading a day 2 pick for Matthew Judon. I think we can also put that prediction or that hope to bed as well. I don't think they're going to double up now and go for the veteran D end, huh?
Probably not. Probably not. But I don't know how wrong you were on Bowers. We don't know that they didn't try that.
That's true.
It just didn't happen. So I don't know. You should take too big of an L on that one.
You know what? I blame the Falcons. If the Falcons were if they were not stupid, if they were smart and just sat there and just doubled up a receiver, take Rome Odunze and call it a day, Bears probably trade out.
Possible. It's possible. They may have taken a tackle and Maybe that
Raheem
changed what the Jets
Morris.
were thinking. I mean, it's one of those things. It's a butterfly effect. There's no question that pick was the one that broke the first round and sent everything off into chaos. That Falcons pick.
Yeah. Let me tell you, I'm glad I'm not a Falcons fan. That I could not imagine what that podcast is like tonight.
You don't want a backup quarterback at 8. That isn't your idea of how you want to. And maybe it works out. Maybe ultimately he's a multi-time Pro Bowler, and but right now as we sit here today, that's a hard one to get your mind around.
That is just, I mean, yeah, but also, yeah, yeah. It's all podcast for no whole another day. Holy cow. That is mind blowing. Wow. Hey, God bless you, Atlanta. That's all I got to say. God bless you. Well, that'll do it for this edition of the Blue Horseshoe Pod. Again, make sure you subscribe, download wherever you do get your pods. We will be back Sunday to do a full, as it sits right now, 7-pick draft. We'll see if that number increases or decreases as we go through the rounds here. But enjoy the cast of the next few days. We'll talk to you to wrap it up Sunday right here. Where else? Blue Horseshoe Pod.